Kmla, how you doing?
Hello, Stephen. Good. How are you?
I cannot complain. I'm doing very well, thank you. Um, I've been looking forward to this because, for those who don't know, I reached out to Kmla through Race and STEM to be a part of a panel discussion at the Dublin Tech Summit a few months back, and it was on a stage which was sold out. And Kmla, you had some ideas, you had some thoughts. And I even remember people in the crowd laughing and clapping in agreement with what you were saying. And I'm very, very happy to invite you here to speak to me today because I think that you're a fantastic professional and a lovely woman who has something who can inspire and shed light on, to be quite honest with you. So, without further ado, give us a whirlwind tour of who Kumla is to begin with.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, all right. Where do I start? I guess so. As I mentioned at Tech Summit, I am originally Indian, but I am Irish really by culture and everything else. Really, I came to Ireland when I was 6 months old in the 90s. So very different Ireland to what people are probably used to today, where it's like a multicultural hub. It looks like London most of the times. But no, I grew up like kind of at a time where it was very white, very Catholic, very Irish, and um, I was quite lost a lot of my life. It wasn't really up until college that I kind of found my footing in the world and myself. And then in tech, that really helped, once I had like kind of a foundation of a bit of trust in who I was, abandoning all of my insecurities that I had accumulated over I don't know, 20 years of being in Dublin.
Mm,
Um, I kind of found myself in the tech industry and then kind of it's just been up from there, I guess.
good. And just from a an understanding of a skill set or qualifications of what you obtained, you obviously went to school, then you went to university,
Yeah.
and you got a degree in,
Computer science.
okay, and that was in Ireland as well.
Yeah, yeah.
What was your pre-college self like?
Yeah. So I was growing up, like, first of all, to encapsulate everything, I was not someone who, enjoyed the kind of powerlessness of childhood. I felt very trapped and I felt like an adult even at the age of like 8 or 9. So at that age, my parents were divorcing, they were dating Irish people, which is unheard of in the Indian world. Definitely unheard of Indians emigrating to Ireland, because also Ireland is, a bit at that time not that friendly towards divorce. So, I was the only brown kid in every room really that I was in. So all of these things just made me stand out. And I just was so painfully aware of my skin. I was so painfully aware of my body, of who I was, of how the fact that I never implicitly fit in anywhere. And I just became so intensely self-aware as a child from a very early age, and that definitely grew me up fast. And I think it's that universal feeling that everyone feels where you just feel so uncomfortable to inhabit your own body.
Mm,
So I was like this solitary anxious ball of energy. And I'd say energy because I was still, even at that age when I'm, so like low key depressed, I was still like really extroverted. I still love seeking out human connection. I still like every time my mom would pick me up, like when I was in some sort of like playground or anything, I'd have made friends with 5 children, obviously very reluctantly entertaining me, but I was just pushing myself out there constantly from a young age. So that quality has definitely stuck the whole way through, the energy that I have.
mm.
But yeah, basically I was an extrovert that nobody wanted to go near me for the first 20 years of my life. And then and then something changed. Um, so that's kind of where we're at there.
We'll get to the something changed in a moment, but
Yeah.
you use the word, and I can see the expression on your face when you say painfully aware
Mm,
of, the fact that you were a brown child.
Yeah.
That's pain. That's a strong statement right there, Kamala.
Yeah, because the moment someone sees you, they have made a set of assumptions about you, about what your voice is gonna sound like, what your home life is gonna be like. Can you simple things of like going to each other's houses after school as you do when you're a kid in primary school. That is just, people are already having preconceived notions about that, like, oh, I don't know if I want to hang out with her. The food that I would eat, grew up vegetarian, which was also problematic at a time. Like, I'm sure kids now are all vegetarian. It's like a trendy thing, but back in the day, that was unheard of.
Mm.
So all these things culminating together. My hair was a big, massive problem of like really curly, wiry hair, and that just I'd see all these beautiful white children with their lovely long straight hair, and I would cry every single day and burn my hair off with a hair straightener. So yeah, it was a pain. Like every part of me was not the same as everyone else's, and it was so difficult to survive in that. And not even like, yes, like I couldn't. It was difficult to even throw myself. So like I've never really played any sports. I don't have
Mm.
any instruments. All my hobbies, everything to this day, are very solitary. There's nothing team based about me, unfortunately, because I never really had that growing up.
Interesting. I mean, look, as we both know, there'll be many people listening to this, watching this, who will agree with what you've just said, and they'll be able to empathize and also identify similarities of your upbringing, and can relate to it,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
which is such a shame. But one of the things about race and STEM is to connect people together so that those who have felt and experienced what you have
Mm-hmm.
can be aware, and you can meet people who can help maybe underpick some of these things as to what happened and how it affected and how you can move forwards. I mean, I know you're a very strong minded woman, having spoken to you, and obviously that has its benefits, I'm sure, when it comes to managerial positions,
Mm.
business positions, things like that. um Before we move on, I just want to kind of maybe ask you if you could give your pre-college stroke college years one piece of advice now, which could also maybe relate to those listening who might be, you know, 16, 17, 18,
Mm.
19, 20, 21 years of age. You represent a younger demographic in the industry.
Yeah, yeah.
What would you say in terms of a piece of advice to yourself and to those people?
That, that's really tough because I would love to just sit here and say, like, chill out, Kamla, it gets better, relax, stop worrying about your face and the future, just chill. But that's so unhelpful to like a teenage girl, which was me, that thought that I was the ugliest person in the world, that nobody would ever want me. I was gonna die alone, like all of these absolute superlatives in every negative way. So
Yeah.
I guess what I would actually say, and the reason why I would pick this is because this is what helped transitioned me out of this state. I'm not saying that I'm totally divorced. I'd say there's still parts of that are still in me. But one thing that helped me was to take enjoyment more of the little things that still come through for you. So I do have, believe it or not, I do have some happy memories of my childhood and teenage years. It's not all just doom and gloom. But I remember those little moments where I did allow myself to be happy and to just let those rules that defined me of like, oh, I can't do that. That's for white girls. I can't dress like that. That's for white. Once I let go of that and just took joy in the little things and the little friendships that I had made that were nice in some ways. Once I allowed myself to enjoy them, I think that's the advice I give. Enjoy those parts and stop putting so much heat on your hair.
I tried that, and
You took it too far, Steve.
took it too far. Yeah, if you want to be bald, then definitely burn your hair. But if you don't, have long locks like yourself, then do what you need to do. We move on to something which I know you're very passionate about, code switching, which I think you've actually
Mm.
helped unlock a little bit more in terms of my understanding of it. Um, you've been in the tech industry for how long, Kmla?
Uh, I've been in interning a lot of summer, so I'd say 2016. I'd
Okay,
say 2016, yeah. So
so 8 7 8 years roughly.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
How did your preconceptions of the tech industry affect your initial experiences?
So, and this is kind of embarrassing. I actually had zero preconceived notions or expectations or anything of tech. I grew up at a time where like I barely, there was no advertising of tech being like this cool industry when I was in college or um even before college. Like there was like I know now there's TikToks of people showing like YouTube and Google offices and
Yeah.
all the cool things you can get. That was just not around back in the day. I had no idea. I didn't even know what a software engineer did. I didn't even know I wanted to be a software engineer when I was studying computer science. So I had zero idea. I knew that I needed to start interning though when I was in college, and I knew that okay, this is gonna be my first experience of like learning what it's like to be in an office, let alone the tech industry. So I got an internship, and I mentioned this when we were at Tech Summit, but it was a really awful experience of just every day a low level humming in the background discrimination from every shape and form. Like there were people in the office that would talk down about specifically Indian people because they had an Indian contracting company, and at times they'd make a lot of incompetency jokes about them. They'd make jokes about the food. And they would do it all in front of my face, thinking I wouldn't know enough English to understand them, like right beside me. And it was just awful because when you're like 19, 20, you're not going to speak up against that. You're just going to, it just brought me because at that stage I was also moving past the trauma I'd experienced from, secondary school, primary school. And I was kind of coming into my own where, wearing what I wanted to wear, speaking how I wanted to speak. And these people in their 30s and 40s talking about me or people that look like me like that, it just set me right back. I was thinking, oh, people are still like this even when they grow up. Oh, okay. So that really negatively impacted me. It wasn't enough to completely deter me. I was thinking this definitely can't be the norm. I spoke to my friends. They said it was not really the norm. To be honest, at that stage, I'd sunk 3 years into the course, so I had to finish it off and see. So there's also a level of pragmatism as well. But I was definitely going into my first job after that. I was acutely aware of like what I wanted to avoid and what I really didn't want to happen again. So
So you would agree then that people with unrepresented identities are viewed through a different lens within the tech space?
yeah, I think it's hard to say the tech space overall because there's so many pockets within tech, right?
Mm.
Like there's like I know it's the company I work for, HubSpot, definitely views it in a positive way that it's and they understand the value that people from different backgrounds can build. Some companies understand like that they need people from different backgrounds, but I think they don't really know what to do with this. I feel like we're, cells in a lab that they're studying. They're like, we don't know what they are, but it's like a unicorn. Like, we don't know what they are, but I'm sure they're needed somehow. Let's just put them together and see what works. I've also been in that scenario.
Mm.
Um, and then there's scenarios that like they have no idea. They're set in their ways. People who stayed in the company for 20 plus years, um they've no want to change anything about how they're doing. So it's kind of a mix between all of that, I would say, right now at this point in time.
Okay. In 2023.
Yes.
Give me a your definition, if you can, very shorthand, in regards to what code switching means to you.
Code switching, and look, I'll preface this with this. I actually am not adverse to code switching. I think it can work in your advantage sometimes. Um, I'll give a definition first though. My version of code switching is when you do a cultural shift in your output of some sort, whether it's how you talk, how you look, your body language, anything like that, in order to I see as I'm phrasing it, it's actually sounding negative. But it's in order to uh, connect with the person that you're talking to.
Okay.
That's one way. So that's the kind of way I like to view it. I know some people view it that it's another way to make yourself seem palatable to
Okay.
other people. That is a form of code switching that for sure I think is problematic. It's done under scenarios where you feel threatened. But I think there's also another type of code switching where you see another minority across the table and you both share something. You can
Hmm.
switch into something that is like a universal language in your world with that person. So for me, it's if I meet someone from the north side of Dublin, which is a little rougher, a little bit, less affluent than the south side, but there's this like joined camaraderie around that, which I like to tap into sometimes. So
Okay.
that's one kind of positive definition.
Okay. So with where you want to take
Mm.
your understanding of code switching, how has your identity evolved over the course of
Yeah.
your career? And has code switching played a part in this progression?
Yeah, no. So this is my new definition. There is definitely a definition that exists for me and for a lot of other minorities, which is when you do it in a way to be palatable for someone else, to make things easier for another person.
Yep.
And as I mentioned, my first 20 years of growing up and hating myself because I can't fit in or make people feel comfortable around me, I definitely made a conscious decision, I would say, when I was 12, 10, 11, around those years, where I just permanently code switched. I essentially sold off my Indian identity. And I said, from now on, the only thing that's going to tie me to that is my skin color, which I cannot change, and my name. So I
Okay.
made
So
sure,
sorry, so
yeah.
not to interrupt there, but when you say sell off your Indian identity, what
Mhm.
what does that mean specifically? What are you selling off? What are you giving away?
So when people ask me where I'm from, I would say I'm Irish first. So
Okay.
that's one. Whenever I'm talking to both my parents or my family or back in my friends, I would maintain the same accent. Because with my school friends, I'd have my Irish accent. With my parents, I would sometimes have an Indian accent slightly. And I said, no more to that. I'm this one person. I'm cultivating an identity here. And it's not with anything to do with India. um I made sure to kind of look at what are the girls around me interested in. I let me figure out if I can get involved in anything like that. So things like fashion and style suddenly became okay. Well, I guess people wear UGG boots, so like this is a small version of it. Like when you're a teenager, this is like your whole world. So that's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to copy. But then as I got older, then code switching changed into more things. So it was like at the start, I'll be brutally honest, dating white guys. Like you don't want to be that girl that, is, oh, she's marrying another Indian guy even though she left India and she only wants to meet like-minded people here. I wanted to be seen as somebody who was just like everyone else. I'm able to talk to white people. I'm able to date white people. I'm able to have a white best friend. All these kind of things. So it's pretty. And I will say, as I say it out loud, it's awful because I see people who've come to Ireland now who are Indian and they're able to like manage this cool dual identity that I never felt like I had. I
Mm,
never felt like I even had the option to have. I don't think it was just all on me. I think it was also the culture was they just did not know what to do with brown people.
mm. Okay. That's a shame.
It is a shame. And to this day, I'm still so distant from that identity, my Indian side. And there are a lot of reasons why I distance myself, like fear of stereotypes and being mislabeled for certain characteristics. That's one thing. But then I've also got a lot of issues with my Indian side, the conservatism that India has, the politics, all of that. I don't identify with that either. So yeah, it is a shame that it's so messed up now. I hope one day I can find my way to it. But yeah.
I remember when, I first reached out to you and, obviously your name's Kumla.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing your name, how it was written on, the screen. And I was like, how do I pronounce this? Like,
Yeah.
Kumla?
How do I make the K and the M work together?
How
Yeah.
do I make the K in the M? And then, when we spoke for the first time, I said, do you mind just telling me how I pronounce your name? And you
Yeah.
just said it with a smile on your face with such ease. And, you know, so, Kmla. I was like,
Mhm.
Kmla, of course it's just Kmla, you know?
Yeah.
Um, it's interesting to hear you talk about what you wanted to give away and what you wanted to keep. Um, Personally and professionally, because you can't help but experience things personally and have an effect on your professional career, you know.
Mhm.
The Kumla who you are, the Steve who I am on a day to day is who I want to be also at work. There's a consistency. However, there are hurdles with this, you know, or there could be hurdles, you know, for someone like yourself who've experienced what you've done. With that being the case, from your perception, you know, what hurdles have you had in your career progression and what have they typically looked like?
Mm. Honestly, the hurdles I've personally experienced have been things like anxiety. And
Yeah.
I'll just unpack that for a second. So my anxiety, I think, was largely self-created. I'm gonna own that for sure. I'm not gonna say anyone instilled it in me. But when you are problem solving professionally, like that's all I do, problem solve every single day in different formats. Uh, and you're already anxious, it's very difficult to get good at your job. So anxiety creates these like invisible hurdles, I think. And I think a lot of minorities can attest to this, that when you have this low level anxiety that you bring into work of like, oh my God, and there's imposter syndrome, there's fear of just not living up to your just base role expectation, forget about everyone else, like what are your expectations of yourself in this job? That's another level. So I think anxiety created these kind of situations where I was, in fight or flight mode. Um, and I realized there were certain opportunities I didn't put myself up for. And that created obstacles in my career, in that, oh, well, you didn't go for this public speaking discussion. So, you have less public speaking, therefore you have less experience here. So, you're not good. It's not that, see, the hurdles never came out as a manager telling me like, you're not getting promoted because of X, Y, Z. They come a lot more like you see other people like, oh, me and that person with the same level of experience. What's the difference? Oh, they're super confident and they're doing this and they're doing this and they're putting themselves up for this. Whereas you're kind of here just in your own trying to create a comfort zone constantly for yourself,
Yeah. Yeah.
and you don't put yourself out there. So that's been my main hurdle, I think, personally.
Anxiety.
Yes, anxiety and not recognizing it in time,
Okay.
recognizing it when it's too late and the problems, the promotion's already gone.
How did you, or how do you, because obviously you're in a managerial position now,
Yeah.
how do you manage those types of hurdles when supporting not just yourself now that you're aware, but then other people who you're
Mm.
surrounded with on a team basis or people who you report into? How do you manage those?
That's really funny. This reminds me of like in the States, I think it was like 2 or 3 weeks ago, they've gotten rid of affirmative action. So this is like where they take your achievements in context with your background for college admissions. So it's in order to diversify college admissions. And
Yeah.
they've gotten rid of that in the States, which I personally think is a big problem. It's not really the solution that they need. And I guess that's the reason I bring it, is it's kind of a similar thing I would do with my team, which is that you look at achievements in the context of their scenario. So for example, we do a lot of asynchronous communication, just because it's all remote working. So Slack, we're on Slack, and we write a lot of like problem statements, we communicate, we debug problems together, we do everything in written format. And when someone doesn't have the best, let's say, standard of English on the team, but they're still able to, you're still able to understand each other, it's just it's not as finessed, shall we say, as a fluent English speaker. That can create, I think, biases for leaders that look and they say, you know there's just something, they're not polished, right? Like that's what we want when we want to look at someone who's due for promotion. They have to be perfect in every regard. So I think that's one thing I look at. I try to take out the English and see like what was their efforts, what was their where was their mind thinking, like how does their mind work, what were they trying to articulate, and obviously giving them help along the way with English, like how can they improve here and there. But
Mm.
for sure, taking accomplishments in context of their backgrounds. Now I don't also now that can be also be perceived in a slightly condescending way, and I don't mean it like that. I just mean it that it's not an equal comparison that we can make. If you're comparing two candidates for a promotion, you can't always compare them under the same heading. Sometimes you have to see, well, what are the extra weights that a person is carrying, and what were they able to do despite that.
Mm. Interesting, interesting viewpoint there.
Yeah.
That's going to be controversial, obviously, because you have, people who believe or know when you hit criteria, that's when you get promoted. It doesn't mean to be, it doesn't necessarily mean to be that, because you're a woman or a
Mm.
man or the color of your skin
Mm.
or, you're a member of the LGBTQ plus group, um, it's fact. If you know you need to get 8 out of 10 to get promoted, as long as you hit 8, whatever color you are, whatever, how you identify yourself, that's that.
Yeah, no, I see what you mean. I guess what I'm trying to say is that w- my definition of 8 might be different to somebody else's definition of 8, might be, different to somebody else's. So I guess what I'm trying to say is there should be flexibility around the top when you're near 8.
Okay.
So it's not like I'm saying a 4 should be an 8. It's like, you see someone a 7.5, but
Yeah.
like, okay, let's like what's different here, and just audit that little difference and see like, well, is anything like they're close, but they miss the mark on, let's say, this attribute.
Yeah.
Well, is this attribute something that the other guys like had even with the difficulties that the other person was dealing with?
Mhm.
So that's something I think it's something to keep in your back pocket, because it is tough. Like when you do want to coach your team to not have these kind of different discrepancies, but they do exist.
Yeah. I understand where you're going, and
Yeah.
I don't disagree. I think it's definitely something that I think, managers, directors, whoever you are as a line manager or hiring manager, have to potentially use at the discretion of what the situation can be.
Yeah.
I think we've seen that, the reports state that, the best teams are the diverse teams. The best teams are those who are able to verbalize and speak freely to managers, but at the same time have a clear vision of what the manager wants to achieve, and all these different types of things, whether it's helped from the regulators or just from the fact that you're a person who is of color or is of another community, and this is your principal morals in general. The diversity and inclusion discussion is obviously ever so important in everything of what the world and companies are going through at the moment, especially coming out of a pandemic, as we've seen. A lot of people have plugged money into wanting to appear to be better,
Mm.
whether they are or not, sorry, is a different story. Um, with that being the case, I think I already know your answer to this, but what can we do to ensure initiatives are authentic and impactful when it comes to discussions around D&I and not just performative or tokenistic?
Yeah. So I'll preface this with, like, there are people whose jobs there are to enact these DNIB initiatives. So like I am an engineer on a team. I know what I've found in the past that's worked. I'm not saying that this is like prescriptive in any way. So,
Yeah.
take that caveat. But from what I've seen is that I if there is a top to bottom approach of, people at the top showing values like empathy and transparency, and you're seeing people of various backgrounds from the top, and that tends to trickle down. Culture is something I think that trickles down to up. Like if you have if you have the bottom layer of your employees in your company all diverse, but then you have a bunch of just like, let's say, white people all on top managing them, that's not gonna, it's tough for it to not be performative. I understand if that's your org and you're trying to change it,
Mm,
that's okay as a starting point, but it's not good if like that's the norm for a long time for you. So I think like getting diversity at all levels of your org, I think is super important for it to not be just performative tokenistic. Another thing is like interviewing. These initiatives are great, but like, are you actually casting your net as wide as you can to all these different types of people? You know, when you have a management role and you see, you know, a predominantly amount of like majority applicants from, you know, let's say white, are you going through the extra effort to finding maybe an external candidate that's outside of your current country? You know,
mm,
there's
mm,
people, you know, especially with remote working, it's very easy to employ, you know, you can figure out the tax laws. It's very easy to employ people from other countries because there's other people like who are migrating from all parts of the world to live in a different big city that maybe your company isn't in. So are you looking in that area as well? Um, I guess one thing I think as well is that it's not even how management looks at you, it's how you all look at each other as well. That's you know, it becomes performative and tokenistic when you're all kind of shoved in together and you don't really know how to react, how to like interact with each other, especially when there's people's first experience of working in a Western company.
yeah.
So I think defining your communication is really important. Like that's one thing I noticed when I joined HubSpot. The communication was so explicit. It was so focused on nearly over explaining, but not to a point of frustration or condescending, but to assure that everybody is on the same page, regardless of English levels or knowledge of the domain. It's like you want to make sure that what you're saying is accessible to as many people as possible. And
Mm,
that's defines your communication. And especially in this remote world, you know, that communication needs to, if you have a culture of, you know, kind of laziness or offhanded remarks, like that's just a big question mark, really.
I mean, look, you know, remote working has played a massive part in enabling, you know, hiring on a global scale in a positive way. There are some people who will be listening to this, and you know, I have to play devil's advocate. I have to
Hmm.
play the role of what if, you know, just to challenge the mind. But, you know, sometimes, you know, if there's a company and the people working at the lower level are very diverse, great. Then you look to mid-management, stroke top senior people, and there's, as you mentioned, not so much diversity there. How do you combat that? You know, it's not easy potentially to be thinking, well, look, I'm a CEO of an organization, I'm a director, I'm a founder of a company, and my initial thought isn't I want the company to be diverse. I'm thinking I want the company to develop this skill set, you know, this drug, this tech piece of equipment that's going to make millions and hundreds of thousands of pounds for people to take home. How do you how do you respond to those people who are thinking, well, I'm not thinking about a diverse environment at C-suite level, at director level. I'm just thinking I just need to get the job done. If you're black, you're black. If you're Indian, you're Indian. If you're white, you're white. If you're purple, you're purple. It doesn't matter who you are as a person. What do you say? What's the importance?
I would just like that is a very tough mindset to combat. I would just say, think about all the stuff that you could be missing and that you probably have already missed in your past solutions or offerings or whatever. If if you focus on, you know, and to be honest, I'd even challenge that. I think if you do focus on just like, okay, you want to get XYZ out in the market and you want to hire somebody new to get that done. I think if you do cast that net properly wide enough and you look beyond just your small little bubble on LinkedIn of like who you know through your connections, you will find diversity. Like it's not, I think there's a lot of implicit biases that can come up when you look for people to join your company, that you want them to immediately fit into your culture. because you want to connect with them and you want to make sure they understand you. You're kind of hiring just yes men then. You're not challenging yourself enough. So it is a tough one. I
It is tough, and
don't.
I don't want to obviously, kind of make anyone feel uncomfortable here, but
Mm,
you take your situation where you grew up,
yeah.
the only Indian child in a school, in a neighborhood, you know. Let's just say, for example, there was, I don't know, the owner of a newspaper who wanted to hire a 14, 15-year-old girl to deliver newspapers to a block, and they genuinely wanted to be as diverse as possible. But the talent pool of these fantastic newspaper, it wasn't available, you know? So I think that's just an example, but you fast
Yeah.
forward to what you've just said, and I think here's the starting point. And you mentioned it earlier on. We're now living in a world where remote working can take place. It doesn't take much to reach using the form of LinkedIn or references, to reach out and say, hey, Kumla, I'm looking for somebody who can maybe do X, Y, and Z in a job as a consultant, as a manager, as a CEO. Do you know anyone? And for you to say, yeah, I know someone who lives in Cameroon or Pakistan or
Hmm.
Chile. You know what? Yes, we can do that because they can work remotely. The only issue is maybe the time zone.
Hmm.
So do you see what I'm saying? So it's not a case of because they're coming from that country, they're the issue in terms of the culture. It might just be a case of, well, how would it work from a time zone perspective? Because we're all logged on at this time and they're logged on at different
Hmm.
times. So could we find a way for it to be, we're working 4 hours of the day at the same time, the beginning of their day, the end of our day, and things like that. But there are ways. We just need to be very experimental and open to options and suggestions.
Yeah.
Coming
Agree.
to the end, looking to the future, in your opinion, what should diverse job seekers be looking for in potential employers? I know for a fact, and I saw it in person, people trying to, grab your services, to join other companies and all that type of stuff. And I know you're very content, and you told me that you were content, and you told them that you were content.
Mm.
But should you hypothetically be open, what should you be looking for in potential employers?
Well, as I mentioned before, people that look like you at every point. A lot of companies are probably not going to have that, but like even a few minority, like even narrow down your version of minority. Are there people of color at the top? Are there people who are, half? Are there, LGBTQ people? Like it's hard to discern that from LinkedIn. I do understand, but
Mm.
are there even people who put their pronouns in their title? Things like that. Um, and look at people's background and experiences, like what are their work experiences that you've seen. I know when I was applying to Hubspot, I just kind of put their name into LinkedIn. I actually think the one of the people on the panel was saying that they did this similarly, where you look at like everybody who's already working the company and you just like stalk all of them on LinkedIn basically. So that's one thing I definitely recommend doing. Have a look at who are the people you're potentially going to be working with. Another
Yeah.
thing I would look at is what are the ages of the people. One thing I find is like if you are in a company that's predominantly young, which is a lot of tech companies, you're gonna see there's gonna be this like work hard, play hard culture, which is fine, but it's usually not the most flexible. Sometimes they can be a little bit problematic in making a hero of people who work overtime.
Mhm.
And if you're a minority who have like, if you have dependents or if you have just some sort of like invisible disability that like prevents you from being in that kind of culture, be aware of that going in. That one's slightly more nuanced and it's something you would definitely see in interviews. I think you could definitely ask about that, but I definitely think age is a good indication. Like if there's people with zero families in your office, that's going to be a very different culture to people who do have families. So I would definitely say that. Um, it is indicative of the work culture. And then expanding probably more on the work culture, I would say what are their one question I always ask in interviews is like, what's your makeup with Asia? Because a lot of companies usually have like Indian contractors. And from experience, not even just my internship, in other places as well, when you have a minority contracting for you, there can be a lot of toxic traits and behaviors that arise from that you don't even know. You start to make a lot of incompetency jokes about that team. You can start to attribute, like, it's like race essentialism. You can like attribute this like to, oh god, all Indians are like this, and then that feeds into your potential hiring decisions later on. So have a look at what their setup is with Asia. It's usually Asian countries, in terms of outputting. It's usually like code or whatever it is. So
Wow.
what is that like? There's nothing wrong with having bases in India and working with Indians, but see, is there's this like natural subordinate culture between the West and the East. That's a bit of a red flag for me if I see that.
Wow.
um Another thing, it's less so in the hybrid world where we're working both in the office and out, but dress code is an interesting one. I think, like, and this is something only find, it's not prescriptive. Maybe other people don't feel this at all, but dress code and formality around dress code is a tricky one, especially when you're a woman. I don't know. I found in the past, it was at that internship actually, I got pulled up because I was told too many men were looking at me, and this was by a woman in HR. And it turned out, I found out on the last day of the interview, nobody reported anything to her, but she just didn't like the way I looked.
Well,
So I think if companies are really, into imposing dress codes and stuff, just be aware of it. Maybe it's fine for you. For me, it personally didn't work out, but it's something to keep in mind. I think the formality that it creates. What else does that bring?
well, you've made some very interesting observations there, which I think can be used across anybody looking at opportunities. The interaction with obviously other continents, brilliant. I think that's something that people wouldn't even think of, I think.
Mm,
Um, and also not just to candidates potentially looking for opportunities, but also to those middle people, people, the recruitment consultants, to also know to ask clients these questions, understand what the demographic is in a certain area of where you're hiring. What
yes.
does that look like? In fact, what is your diversity and inclusion strategy? Is there
Mm,
one? Who looks after D&I in the companies? Why do you ask this question, Mr. Recruiter? Well, the people who you've asked us to find and identify from a skill set perspective are going to be relocating. They want to know what they're walking into. So it counts for a lot. It really does. And it's the small things which are the big things.
mm,
And yeah, look, there's some great suggestions right there. Thank you. Um, Last question to you, Kumla, before
okay.
I let you go. What advice have you got for your future self?
That's a weird one because I
It's a
really
great
hope.
one. It's a
I've
great
never
one.
heard.
It's not a
It is a
weird
great
one.
one.
It's a great one.
Did you come up with that question? Because I've never heard that question.
Yes, I did.
I love it. I love it. It's a weird one because I really hope my future self does not need advice from my current self. I barely know anything right now, but I would say my only advice is to keep what I'm doing on this very specific regard, which is keep maintaining a close relationship with yourself. Because I noticed that the toughest points of my life is when I'm out of touch with myself and I'm not listening to my body, when I'm not listening to my emotional reactions to things, when I'm not fully processing and finishing emotions, when
Yeah.
I'm keep cutting myself short and putting myself down. So when you keep a close relationship to yourself, I find that you have a natural kindness that comes with that. And I think you're able to deal with a lot of things better and you're able to think a lot clearer. You can also just, again, I bring up anxiety. You create less anxiety, I think, because
Yeah.
the world creates enough for us. So let's calm down. So I would definitely just say, just future Kamala, please keep that relationship close with yourself.
That's beautiful. Thank you. And hello, future Kumla, if you can see me. I don't know where you might be. Spain, Portugal, India, wherever you might be.
Hung
Hello.
over in a ditch.
Um, well, listen, first of all, thank you for your contribution to the Tech Summit. Thank you for speaking to me one-on-one here on Race and STEM. And just thank you for being a bright light to many people who are up and coming who would see you as an ambassador, as a mentor. You know, I'm sure your organization respects you very highly and, you know, consider you as somebody who is a class act. So may your journey continue to have so much success and positivity, you know, and I look forward to seeing where Kmla ends up in the next 5 to 10 to 20 years.
Oh,
I
thank
won't be
you.
stalk I won't be stalking you on LinkedIn, don't worry. I thought
No,
you were gonna say, hey, how's it going?
you'll be in the DMs. Yeah. No, such kind words. Thank you so much, Steve. Thank you,
You're
honestly.
welcome. Thank you. Take care.
All right. Bye.